Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hurt Handbook. And actually, I'm going to pay homage to our special guest by saying the Hurt Handbook is back in your life. And obviously, our special guest is 13-time MMA Journalist of the Year award winner, Montreal Expos superfan, and most importantly, host of the MMA Hour, the one and only Ariel Helwani. So thank you for coming on the Hurt Handbook, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, and I appreciate that intro very much. Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So obviously we've been talking a little bit before we started recording because we did the WPSBJ podcast, which I also appreciate you coming on. And that made me want to ask you, and I know you kind of got into it there, but just also for my channel's listeners, just how come you're so motivated to give back not only to like aspiring MMA journalists like myself, but also just journalists in general?
Because I was once you, not that long ago. I kind of feel like we're still, I'm still in the same spot, to be honest. And so I looked up to people and I aspired to be like people and I viewed people as role models. And I feel like we could all use help, even if I'm in my 60s. Like, you're never too old to learn. You're never too old to give back. You're never too young to do the same as well. And these things are very, very important. I have always felt like it's important to try to mentor or give back. I don't want to just be on an island by myself doing all of this. Like, it's important to have other voices and other personalities and other journalists out there. So I love doing this sort of thing because I was a wide-eyed kid at school looking up to other journalists and dreaming of doing things like they were doing. And I guess, the tables have turned, so to speak, where I'm now on that other side of the fence. And I'd be doing a disservice to myself and anyone who's ever taken the time to give me advice if I didn't, you know, pay it back. So I love this type of thing. When schools reach out, when I left Syracuse in 2004, I said I would only come back if they invited me back, like if they wanted me to be one of those speakers. And in 2014, they invited me back, and that was like a huge, huge deal for me, a really big honor. So yeah, love doing this type of stuff.
That is awesome, and obviously, I'm a big fan myself. And we've talked about your journalism many times on the podcast too, because me and my co-host, who's not here right now, but we both respect what you do immensely. So I'll just
Thank
get
you.
right into the question. Right into the question. Excuse me. So obviously, in MMA, there's a lot of interesting and like charismatic personalities for sure. And I know you've had your fair share of interesting encounters with fighters over the years. Like one that comes to mind for me always is the Nick Diaz one all those years ago. And my question to you is, you're obviously always dealing with interesting personalities. So how do you maintain control of your interviews while, I guess, grappling with those personalities? No pun intended,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. You know, sometimes I don't maintain control. It's just a matter of, like, asking the right kind of questions, being calm, not getting too emotional, not getting too fired up. Those things are very important. Never feeling like you're losing control. Like, even, the, a guy like Sean Strickland or something like that. It's like just being calm and not getting too crazy is super important. Not taking yourself too seriously is important. So not getting too offended or anything like that is very, very important. I really think that, if you're prepared, if you're professional, if you're calm, you know, it'll all work out. But if you like start to show emotion and you start to get too agitated or animated, that would lead to the other person getting, agitated, animated, etc. So I just try to be cool. I try to be prepared. I try to roll with the punches. That's very important as well. Like, if someone wants to all of a sudden take the conversation in a different direction, like, all right, let's go. As long as it doesn't get offensive, doesn't cross the line, I'm down to do whatever. I think one of the problems with media these days is that we only want to talk to people who are like minded. And I don't care. Like, in fact, I welcome people who are completely different than me. I actually find those conversations to be even more interesting. So, yeah, I don't mind if the conversation, the interview goes in a different direction. It's just important to, like, not get too emotional and not get too fired up, because then it could unravel.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And I agree, honestly. So my next thing is similar, and it involves obviously, because we're both big MMA fans, and you've been a fan probably as long as I've been alive at this point. So
Huh.
my thing is, obviously when you're interviewing fighters, there's got to be people that you just happen to be a fan of, either in the cage or outside of the cage. So how do you deal with your fandom of the sport combined with having to interview them and get good info out of them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. First and foremost, I started off as a fan, right? And I think that I once was given advice like think like a fan but act like a professional. And so it's okay to think like a fan. It's okay to get fired up. It's okay to be excited. If you lose that, then you're like losing your touch, right? You never want to lose that passion. If it's fabricated, if it's fake, if it's inauthentic, then the audience is going to see right through that. And so I think it's okay to think like a fan. You don't want to act like a fan. You don't want to ask for autographs or take pictures with people like, hey, give me a selfie, like you don't want to do that. um that's obviously crossing a line, but your questions have to come from a place of a fan, meaning like, okay, I've always thought it's a privilege to be standing here with a microphone or interviewing this guy or this woman. So, like, what do I want to know as a fan? Like, what would I want to know if I was watching this interview or listening to this interview? So you have to think like a fan, but act like a pro. That's very, very important. So I don't try to suppress the fandom. I just don't want to come across as a fanboy in that, like, I have biases or things like that. That's where you could get in trouble, but you never want to lose that passion.
Yeah, I understand keeping it authentic. And obviously, I was watching the show on Monday after I got home from work, and I saw how fired up you were for Leon Edwards, and that was
Yeah,
pretty awesome for him. So I personally enjoy that authenticity, and I think that it adds a lot to the show.
thank
And
you.
obviously, you just mentioned asking the questions that people want to know the answers to, and that you yourself want to know the answers to. And that's something that I really admire about your style, because I think sometimes with other MMA like sites that they kind of, I don't I don't want to pick the wrong word for it, but they ask like just random fluff questions like how was camp, the typical
Yeah.
stuff. And I think you do a really good job at not only just humanizing the fighters, but also while having a real conversation with them, you just also get the info that the fans want to hear. So my question involving that is just like, what do you think overall, like the state of MMA media in general?
No, it's fine. I mean, listen, when I was coming up or starting out, like there were a lot of great journalists, and I would always say, like, I thought that the MMA media core, even though we may have been younger, I would put it up there with any other sport. Obviously, there's less of us, but there were incredible writers, incredible feature writers, incredible reporters. It's become almost like a divided thing now, where the UFC only wants like a certain type of journalist covering their event, their press conferences and things like that. And you could see like some of the very best journalists. There are some who are good that are there, but some of the very best journalists aren't even at the events, aren't at the press conferences.
Yeah,
But if you
I
look
agree with that.
around, there's a good like mix of young guys and older guys like myself who do great work, who cover the sport in different ways, who give you different content. Like, it's in a good spot. I know it's kind of cool to just crap all over the MMA media, but honestly, I think it's in a pretty good spot. I don't love some of the stuff that I see at the events, but who am I to tell someone what to do and what not to do? But the UFC has kind of invited that type of that type of personality, that type of behavior. It's not what like people at a press conference asking about parlays and things like that. Like, that's just inappropriate, but that's what they want. They want like an entertainment show, not necessarily a press conference. You'll see more of the press conferencey stuff, like in the post-fight press conference when there's not a crowd there, and so it's fine. Again, just like anything, like, you just have to know where to look. You have to know who to go to for the goods. But there's a solid, there's definitely a lot of characters, but there's a solid group of MMA journalists covering the sport right now, in my opinion.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that you think that. Obviously, your opinion means a lot. So, um, Now, one thing I wanted to get into is obviously you've had many jobs over the course of your career, both in MMA and outside of it, with the WWE opportunities and the NBA opportunities when you were at ESPN. So I just wanted to ask you, what moment, if you can choose one, means the most to you, like about your career?
Oh man, I don't know if I could choose one, man. There's been a lot of crazy moments. Like obviously, when I found out I was going to ESPN, that was a goal of mine. That was huge. The NBA stuff was huge. Doing some of the boxing events recently for Showtime was huge. Getting the HBO Real Sports job after I was an intern there in 2003 was huge. Um, like the MMA Hour and what it's become. There's just I would not feel comfortable picking one. I feel like there have been a lot of milestones or turning points, exciting moments and achievements, but it would be like picking my favorite child. I don't know if one has felt bigger than all the rest, but I'm very thankful for all of them, and I want more. I'm also a little bit greedy as well, and I want more, so it keeps me motivated to try and do more.
Maybe think about getting into covering some power slap.
No,
Yeah, no, I'm
no,
just
I
messing
would
around with
not.
you.
No,
But
I know you were, but I would not.
yeah, no. But so
I
my
would
next
rather pour hot sauce in my eyeballs.
yeah, honestly, I agree with that.
Yeah,
But the next thing I wanted to ask you about, and I know it's been a subject that's kind of hovered around your career for years now at this point, but the whole Dana White situation, and obviously I know you've talked about it many times on your own show, but just to enlighten maybe some of our more casual audience that doesn't know as much about the ins and outs of MMA, um, do you think that your relationship with Dana White could ever be repaired?
sure. I don't see why not. He might say something different, but I don't see why not. Like again, I think life is too short for craziness. Like a lot needs to be repaired. There's no doubt about that, and it cuts pretty deep. But I would never say never. I would never say no. I would be open to anything. It may not work out, but I would be open to anything with anyone. By the way, I think that's an important part of life. Again, he might feel differently, but that's how I feel in my heart.
Yeah, and exactly. I mean, obviously, you can only control what you feel. So obviously what Dana White feels or any of your other critics feel is kind of out of your control anyway. So no point
Right.
in focusing too much on that. Um, one of the things that interests me about like your style is just like I said, how you just are so effective at really just getting good information and interviewing people. And I was just wondering, how far back does that go? Like, how did you develop such like a good feel for interviews? Because I personally, like I said, I'm not just saying this because you're in front of me. I've been watching your show since probably Jones Cormier one, so it's been like a minute, and I'm a fan of it, like I said. So how did you just develop your style of interviewing people?
Man, it's like anything reps, it's like a football player, it's like a soccer player, baseball player. It's like the more you do something, the more you get comfortable. I've listened to a crap load of interviews, from people like Howard Stern, who I think is one of, if not the best interviewer of my life, to people like Larry King. I used to listen to Charlie Rose a lot, other sports interviewers. I know what I think makes for a good interview. I know what I want to hear as a listener because I listen to so much. Um, asking the right kinds of questions, being interested and prepared, and short questions and not long, drawn out questions, and having a sort of arc to the interview is very important as well. Like I love the art of interviewing. I could talk about interviewing. I wish I could do like teach a course on interviewing. I just love everything about it. I really enjoy the challenge of interviewing someone, especially when they're maybe not willing to give up information early on. Like it's almost like a boxing match. Like you have to throw a jab and you got to slip and then you have to come back and maybe throw a hook. And I enjoy all of that. So yeah, it's listening to all these people, practicing over and over again. But the key to a great interview is listening because if you show up to the interview with just a sheet of questions and you don't listen to what the person says, you don't know what that person is going to say. If you go to dinner or you go to lunch or you go get a coffee with a friend, you're not showing up with a sheet of questions. Um, you're listening, you're talking, you're responding, they're responding, and it's going back and forth. Those are the best interviews, the ones
Right.
that feel like they're conversations. Um, so that's something that I've really, tried to stay true to, and just doing it so many times, naturally you're gonna get better.
Yeah, honestly, I'm like that's something I'm definitely trying to improve on myself. And you coming on the Hurt Handbook is, I think, by far the biggest interview we've had so far. So that's awesome. And thank you again, like I said, for
No
coming on.
problem.
And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, so I just have one last question
No
before we
problem.
go. And it's more of like a fun MMA type of question. Um, I don't think that the UFC would ever do any sort of cross promotion, but if they did, which promotion do you think would have like the best odds at stacking up against the UFC's champions, like champion
Oh,
versus champion every division? Which promotions champions do you think would do the best against the UFC's?
that's a great question. I thought that you were gonna ask like which would have the best chance to co-promote, and I'm like, I don't know if the UFC is gonna co-promote with anyone. But
Yeah,
no,
no.
to me right now it has to be Bellator. It's funny because I don't feel like Bellator has a ton of momentum, and I think like the rest of their weight classes are a little bit thin. But the champions, I think, since Strikeforce, maybe even Pride, no promotion has had this many champions that you could at least make the argument that they would beat the UFC champions. Vadim Nemkov, you could make the argument that he would beat Jamal Hill or Yuri Prochazka. And I know he fought Yuri Prochazka several years ago, but I I I think Vadim Nemkov, excuse me, is very good. Speaking of which, Johnny Eblin is amazing, and he's a horrible
Yes.
style matchup for Alex Pereira. So I'd fancy his chances. Yaroslav Amosov is really good as well. Does he beat Leon? I don't know, but is it an interesting fight? Yes. Usman Nurmagomedov is incredible. Him versus Islam would be nuts. It'll never happen, but it would be nuts. Patricia Pitbull, incredible. So like they've got a group of at least five guys that I think you could go head to head with the UFC. It'll never happen, but it's nice to see some competition out there with some great champions. And also, what I like about it is they're all guys that don't have connections to the UFC. Like I know they're not homegrown necessarily, but they feel more homegrown if they're not UFC castoffs, and I think that's very important as well.
Yeah, I also agree with that. And I think that even besides Bellator, I know another promotion that I really like is One Championship. I think the PFL does a pretty good job too. And I think I know Francis Ngannou was saying that either of those could be an option for him. And I think that him going to either of those promotions would do numbers for them, both like in like actual viewership
Oh
and
yeah,
then also like just for credibility's sake. So I agree with you there though. I think that Bellator
huge.
probably stacked the best. But that's all I pretty much had for you. Like I said, I didn't want to take up too much of your time. We're recording this later at night, so I know you're a pretty busy guy, and I'm just happy that you wanted to take the
Yeah,
time to
yeah.
come on here, man. So I
Oh, I
really
appreciate it. No,
appreciate it.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for having me on. Again, I'm sorry that I couldn't make it this week, but I'm going to make it in the future, and I appreciate your interest and I appreciate your kind words. And keep on, keep on doing it. There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. I still have those every single day. Is very important. Like one thing that I believe in is not to feel sorry for yourself. You hit a roadblock, dust yourself off, get right back on there. Get on that horse, keep on going, keep on fighting, and ultimately, no one's going to feel sorry for you. So why should you feel sorry for yourself? And if you have a passion for MMA or for anything, over time it could be something else. Keep building that, keep fueling that fire, and great things will happen.
Got you, man. And like I said, thank you so much. This was really cool for me. Like I've been watching you forever, so this is like an out of body experience in a
Uh-huh.
way. So thank you. Like for me, this is almost as I know I've seen your interview with Rich Eisen. So like he's the big
Yeah,
host of
man.
Sports Center. For me, this is basically the
Oh,
same.
I don't know how that's possible. I don't view myself like that. It means a lot, truly, it really does, because you see me like you, right? Like you see how I talk to those other guys, right?
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
and I look up to them, and so I get where you're coming from. I totally get where you're coming from. I don't see myself like they're pros. I'm just some schmucky guy who talks about sports, MMA, whatever it is. But I appreciate it very, very much. It really does mean a lot to me.
All right, man. Well, thank you again. And everybody make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on all our socials. Everything will be in the description. So see you, everybody.